In fact, 11 states, this has been a revolution that started 2 years ago with Texas. Governor Perry did it via executive order. His comptroller did it for the array of agencies, and his legislature enshrined it into law. Since then, like I said, it's gone to 11 states. What does this do? A host of things. Eliminates corruption, eliminates the potential for future corruption, it identifies waste. We can go in and find waste to trim the budget and the fat. This especially is useful when we come up against legislative fights where the one side wants tax hikes. We propose spending because we know the government doesn't have a revenue problem, they have a spending problem. This will help us have an articulate and educated debate as to why tax increase proposals are not workable and bad policy. Just for an example, in Texas, they were the first one to do it. Since they've done it, the comptroller's office has estimated that her agencies that she oversees have saved over $2 million just in waste and saving opportunities they've identified on this database. Just an example, they found out if they combined contracts for toner, consolidated between 5 different agencies, they'd save over $70,000 a year in taxpayer dollars. That's just one instance of the things you can find by putting government expenditures online. So there's handouts in front of everyone that shows how this has moved through the certain states, where it's come up. There's more information online at atr.org, comprehensive information. And our goal that we're going to work on over the next 10 years is to get every state, all 50 states, along with local and county governments, to have their expenditures online in a searchable format. For all the good reasons I mentioned, on top of it, it's a right-to-know issue for taxpayers. You have the right to know where your money goes. So there's so many reasons why this is a good idea. It's a simple idea, and it's happening. It's not an imaginary idea. So it's making its way across the country, and our goal is to get it to all levels of government, federal, state, local, county, and 2 counties have already actually gone ahead and do it. So we think it's a new revolution. It's the next big thing, and it's moving along. I just want to end by calling attention to, I talked about federal level tax situation right now, what we're looking at. I'll call attention to the implications of this election as far as your taxes and how much you pay. There are a couple matrices and charts in front of everyone. There's a 2-sided chart. One goes through every major category of federal level taxation and breaks it down into simple terms, the difference in numerical difference that you're looking at between the 2 candidates. And you hear a lot of platitudes being spoken about in this election and messaging, grandiose messaging. This cuts through all that and shows you quite simply what this means for your pocketbook, for the economy. So I encourage everyone to look at that. Also, if you flip to the back, again, energy looks to be maybe the issue of this election. This shows you different areas where they are in energy policy between McCain and Obama. And it shows you especially tax-related energy policy. And again, it shows you there's really no issue where these 2 candidates differ so starkly as that of taxes. So that's the situation. Another thing, a point on the back of the transparency handout, another information trend we've pointed out is it's called the hell in the handbasket chart I have in front of you, and it shows in the last 2 years since Democrats have taken control of Congress, the cost trends among costs of commodities, basic consumer goods, all the way to the Dow Jones average and things like that. And what the trend shows, it's all been negative since the Democrats have come into control. So they like to blame this on Republican power in the first 8 years of the decade, but this illustrates that things have gotten much worse, including their approval ratings since they've taken over power. So it's going to be an important election, and ATR is going to continue moving on to oppose all efforts to increase taxes at the federal and state level. Like I said, we've done a good job at the federal level. Could become much harder depending on who wins the White House. At the state level, again, we are going to continue every year. In this state, you guys were able to get away with a budget without any tax increases. I understand there was some debt problem, but no tax increases nonetheless. But that's not for them not being proposed. We all know Governor Easley had his favorite tax hikes that we're able to oppose. So these are going to keep coming back up every year at the state level. ATR is going to continue to work to defeat these. And if you'd like more information on ATR, the transparency efforts, and other tax information at the state and federal level, I urge you to go to atr.org. We also have a link to our blog where we cover national, state, quite often North Carolina issues. So that concludes my remarks.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, Patrick. And no group has really done more on the ground to illustrate the fact that we do have a spending problem than ATR. And if you ever get a chance to go to Grover's meeting in Washington, I think is that every Wednesday?
Every Wednesday from 10 to 11:30. Yes, please. It's a big, large coalition meeting, and if you're interested, come get me. I'll give you a card at the end.
They call it the Center-Right Coalition, and it's an amazing thing to see where Grover goes around to each group involved in that Center-Right Coalition to see what's going on. But holding politicians' feet to the fire on spending is critical to moving forward. Our next two speakers are kind of illustrative of the ideas that are out there about how do we reform our tax code. Okay, these guys are doing a good job of trying to simply stop spending. The next two groups represented, the fair tax and flat tax folks, are talking about ideas on how we dramatically change things. I mean, no doubt that energy is going to be the big topic. Last year, North Carolina Senate Bill 3 is a massive, massive tax increase in your, or just bill increase in your utilities and things like that. It may amount to over $500 million increase, not called a tax, but it's all about energy. But right now, I'd like to bring up Larry Hull, who's a 54-year-old native of North Carolina, from Tarboro, North Carolina, who's lived in Raleigh since 1976, where he graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. We'll forgive you for that one. Thank you. He has an 18-year-old son who will be starting this fall at NCSU. See? Evolution works. So he has 25 years experience as a certified financial planner, but these days he's involved in buying, rehabbing, and selling residential real estate. He was a member of the Toastmasters International for about 8 years and is a volunteer reader for the Triangle Radio Reading Service. He has been a volunteer speaker for the Fair Tax for a little over 2 years now, and at this time I'd like to bring Larry Hull up, make him feel welcome.
Thank you, Wake County Young Republicans and guests. How many of you have read this book, The Fair Tax? This came out in August of 2005 and became a New York Times bestseller 2 weeks in a row. That's saying something, that people can get that excited about taxes that they would put that on the New York Times bestseller list. Well, for those of you who have not read that, let me just concisely explain what the fair tax is. And yeah, it sounds like some sort of an oxymoron, but this was based upon a survey. We showed people what we wanted to do, and they said, hey, this sounds very fair. So we thought, what the heck? Let's copyright it. So, fair tax. This is a designation that we have ascribed to a piece of legislation that's actually before the U.S. House of Representatives, H.R. 25, and the Senate. That's S. 1025 in the Senate. We have 72, I believe, 72 co-sponsors in the U.S. House of Representatives and 5 co-sponsors in the Senate. This piece of legislation was initially conceived, I think back in 1995. Leo Lindbeck headed up the idea of coming up with a more responsible, more efficient way of raising revenue in this country. And so he threw it out to some economists. He thought they'd come up with something such as a flat tax, something of that nature, but no. They said the most efficient way to raise revenue is a national retail sales tax, a consumption tax. So, under the terms of this legislation, we would actually do away with the federal income tax. No more individual, yes indeed, no more individual income tax, no more corporate income tax. No taxes on savings. You take your entire paycheck home. No taxes on investments. No alternative minimum tax. Whoa. No gift tax, no inheritance tax. The economists determined that everything we buy, whether it's a service we use or it's a product that we purchase, has an embedded tax. On average, that amounts to some 22% of whatever it is you buy on an inclusive basis. So, getting rid of the federal income tax, you eliminate that embedded tax. Cost of products go down. You replace that with a national retail sales tax. We're talking on the order of 23%. There have been some discussions where it might be a tax that would be less than that. We'll just have to see how it works out when we get it implemented, and that's the one thing we're determined to do. But that aside, essentially everything, once you implement the fair tax, everything is going to cost roughly the same. Now, you hear some people say, well, it's not 23%, it's 30%. We're figuring on an inclusive basis. Take the case of the income tax bracket of 25%. If you figure that on an exclusive basis, much like you're right now paying a 7% retail sales tax here in North Carolina, yeah, okay. that 25% tax would, instead of being 25, would be 33%. So we're trying to compare apples to apples, talking about an inclusive tax of 23%.